Thank you, Kat, for that amazing insight into people, and an amazing segue into my talk, which, ironically, in my line of work, people are actually the problem, right? I'm sure you didn't see that coming. So if it's not the hackers that are busy trying to get into my organization's systems, it's the people who just keep downloading things and clicking on links, even after I tell them not to, right? So in my role, I spend a lot of time trying to understand the motivations of people around me and how the world fits around them. And what do I do? My name is Rahayu Ramli. I'm the head of cyber strategy and architecture in the cybersecurity team for Petronas. And Petronas, as I'm sure some of you know, is a global energy company. We have presence in more than 100 countries. And as Malaysia's national oil and gas company, we are also the safe guardian and also manage the hydrocarbon resources for our country. What that means is that security and safety are paramount to our operations around the world. But as a cybersecurity practitioner, I can safely tell you that being in this job is both fascinating and horribly terrifying. But this is not a session on cybersecurity, so I will not be talking about CrowdStrike. And it is also not a session on oil and gas. This session is about people and how they impact innovation and change. So my career has been in technology for the most part, in some shape or form. And I've had the privilege of working in 3 different companies across both local and global companies. And I worked in different industries across finance, logistics and transportation, energy, education. But irrespective of location, job, or the industry itself, change is most often very uncomfortable, especially if it's unwanted or it's something that is not the choice of the recipient, right? So every role that I've ever held, if there was a delay or an obstacle, chances are at the core of it, it was a people problem. So this diagram is from Gartner's Human Resource Research team. And essentially what they did was try to analyze employee willingness for enterprise-level changes prior to the pandemic, so 2016, in comparison to after the pandemic in 2022. And what they found was that employees were significantly less receptive to change at the enterprise level after the pandemic, right? So it's a very stark change. And what that little triangle is trying to tell us is that when we came out of the pandemic and organizations were very busy trying to get back to normal, whatever that meant at that point, employees were busy going through their own changes. Coming out of the pandemic changed forever in the way they work and the way they handle life. And yet somehow, as organizations, we continue to try to behave the same way we did before the pandemic. And that dichotomy, that ability to shift the change, did not transfer well. Right? So the research is currently looking into different ways how we build human resource strategy to shift the way that we think about people within the organization. So I started my career in technology consulting. So the first picture is the only picture I have of the true nature of consulting from my perspective, right? It's always been really frustrating when you deploy a system, you work through all these different code, you design, you create functional specs, and then you roll it out, and somebody will say, yeah, I don't want to use this. You guys didn't come and talk to me. You didn't think about how this was going to change the process. And the funny thing is, every single system implementation I've ever done has a component called change management, right? Which in theory means exactly what it says. You manage change. But more often than not, especially with technology, this involves a lot of training materials, a lot of job aids, and a lot of really pretty posters. What it actually means is managing the people who are affected by that change itself. And the irony of this is that in technology implementations, in my experience at least, is that change management tends to have the smallest team, the smallest budget, tends to be the first thing that gets cut, and is tended to be looked at as a fluffy component of the technology implementation. Until the day you go live, somebody makes that complaint, and suddenly key stakeholders are everywhere, and adoption becomes my metric of the day suddenly, right? So now, though, after the significant boom across all of the big tech, we now see that change management has become a business of its own, right? All these consulting companies have entire armies of people who do change management. But the thing I guess we should ask ourselves is, why is it that we need an external party to come in and tell us what is wrong with the people in our organizations? Right? So the other job that I had was also in a technology company. And so those are the other 3 pictures that I have significantly more of. And that was because that was my dream job. It was about taking technology and bringing it to the classroom, right? This was absolute nation building. I love that role. But the interesting thing about that role is, number one, it was change management in a different way, but it also involved the smallest team ever. It was me and one other person trying to deploy this thing to all the schools in Malaysia, right? So, we come in with this shiny tech, and then the first thing we realize, it's actually just more shiny tech that the teachers were having thrown at them, right? The teachers didn't want just more tech. They wanted the empowerment to be able to do what they needed to do with that technology, excuse me, with that technology, and be able to share the ideas that they wanted to do and not be prescribed what to do. So when we shifted from trying to showcase the technology in the classrooms to instead building communities that the teachers could come together in and share their ideas, that's when we started to see the usage of our devices and the applications increase, almost twofold. Right? In Petronas, the angles are slightly different, right? And for several reasons. Number one, from both a geographical as well as a business perspective, we are very diverse, right? Just the fact that we are in more than 100 different countries and we operate across the oil and gas supply chain means that we have employees with various different personas who do various different things. And depending on where you are in the organization, your customer will be different, right? For myself in cybersecurity, my primary customer are my internal teams, right? The different divisions. You may also be working with somebody who is a partner in the oil and gas supply chain, or you may actually be working with retail customers who visit our petrol stations, excuse me, who visit our petrol stations and our convenience stores, right? But in part and parcel of the digital transformation that we went through in 2017, we started to realize very quickly that the effective change only happened when we put people at the center of our strategies. So I'm going to tell you 3 different stories about how this worked, but my favorite one is actually cybersecurity related, right? So what you see behind me are 2 phishing emails, right? One of the many, many phishing emails that my team deploys out to our staff on a monthly basis. Now, if you have never encountered a phishing email before, essentially phishing emails are not what you see is what you get, right? They're designed to basically fool you into clicking a link or downloading an attachment, right? With the idea that if somebody is in a hurry or they actually feel that the message is, they have something being delivered by DHL, they will actually click it, right? Click on the link, fill out the information there, which is typically credentials, right? So your login, your username, or asking for bank account details, right? You're going to win 5,000 ringgit. Just send me your details, and I'll send the money to you. Typically, though, what's going to happen, the hacker is either going to install malware on your device, or they're going to take that information, log into the website that you were talking about, and eventually steal your information, or your identity, or your money, or all of those above, right? So obviously, we wanted to prevent this. Many studies have shown that cyber attacks typically start with a social engineering attack, right? And phishing is a textbook social engineering attack, right? It misuses trust, creates urgency, forces people to accidentally do really stupid things. But once that information is out there, it's really hard to get back, right? So for companies, this is problematic. So imagine if a hacker gets login details to your critical systems, they go in, they bring it down, and that's it. You have a reputational and financial nightmare to deal with, and some companies will never recover from this, right? So, excuse me. So as you can imagine, Petronas was very concerned about phishing. They were actually very concerned that employees understood that cybersecurity was an important part of our operations. So we first designed a cybersecurity change management strategy that we called the human firewall. So the human firewall is like a firewall, but it's made up of humans, right? So as the first line of defense, we wanted our staff to understand that there are things, oops. Okay. Sorry, I'm standing a little bit hard on the stage, so. So there are things that you can do as staff that will enable us to prevent cyber attacks from happening as a collective, right? So super like, kumbaya a bit. But the idea was that if we could teach people through this program, especially about things like phishing, we could prevent some of these things from happening. Excuse me. So the idea was we would have all this training content. And if any of you have been part and parcel of a training program for phishing, you'll understand it can get a little bit intensive and a little bit much, right? So there's a lot of training content. You'll see posters everywhere. You'll get emails about what is phishing. And then you'll get these monthly emails, right? So what these emails are designed to do is to keep people on their toes to understand what are the key markers for phishing, right? And some are more obvious than others. And when we learn about new techniques, we will teach people those in the next phishing test. And the failure rate is considered to, excuse me, a click is considered to be a failure if you click on the link and then you enter your information, right? So then you get a message saying, haha, you've been phished, and then you fall into that category of failure. Okay? And we benchmark the percentage as an industry benchmark, and for us that was 4% for oil and gas. So the aim was to keep our failure rate below 4%. The idea being that you can't prevent everything, but you can at least teach people how to do it better. Okay? So it went really well. We did this, we've been doing it since 2019, and for the most part, initially when we started, it was really bad. People just wanted free stuff all the time, clicked on stuff, entered their email. It was a mess. But we had really intensive training. We talked to people when they actually did phish, so we can see who fails the list. And eventually, over 3 or 4 months, we started to see it go down. And 8 or 9 months into the whole program, we were pretty confident that most of our staff understood what phishing markers was, right? You can't prevent everything, but you at least can hit most of the more obvious phishing markers, and the staff seemed to understand that. Then, we started to get complaints. So, well, we started to hear people say that the attendance response rate to their meetings was going down. People were not filling out surveys, and online training was not being done because people didn't want to click into the links in their emails and therefore just deleted them, right? Then on top of that, even better, we started to get people forwarding emails to everybody in cybersecurity. Hey, can you help me check, is this a malicious link? Can you just verify before I click on it? And so suddenly we all had like extra jobs of being email checkers trying to figure out if the link was malicious, okay? So we had sown just enough distrust and fear of emails that we had actually slowly but surely been wearing away at the operational effectiveness of our own organization, right? So what our strategy had forgotten to take into account was that people's behavior is not a point in time, right? It extends so much further than that one experience or that one interpretation of an event, which for us was the phishing email, right? So we were like, hey, as long as you don't click, we're fine. But we had forgotten when a staff experiences a phishing email, and I know this sounds esoteric, but when a staff experiences an email, they're thinking, I don't want to cause a cyber attack. I don't want to get reported. I also have 2 seconds to decide if I want to click on this link, and therefore my self-preservation instinct will tell me to just ignore it, all right? We didn't take any of that into account. We just wanted that phishing failure rate to go down. And so by doing that, number one, we had alienated the original education part of the phishing training. And the second, we had obviously wreaked havoc across the rest of the organization by screwing with their processes as well. So after some deep contemplation and some scolding from various different parties in Petronas, we then took a step back. And we started to look at different ways that we wanted to improve our phishing training program. Now, I forgot to mention earlier, our initial tagline was stay vigilant and don't get phished, which we then realized in hindsight was probably a little bit too directive, and people took that literally and decided not to click on anything, right? So one of the first things we did was actually change the tagline to be think before you click. And obviously that is very obvious, but the nuance was that, you know, it's okay to click on stuff, we just want you to think about it before you actually do it, right? We also spend a lot of time talking to people. So we talked to people who failed the test, try to understand sort of what makes something a bit more attractive in comparison to others. We spoke to people who were sending emails, like what was the kind of response they were getting from people who received the emails and considered them to be phishing. The third thing that we did was also look at the actual phishing results itself. So initially we were just happy to see that it was going down. But when we get particularly bad feedback, meaning to say the phishing failure rate was super high, then we decided, okay, we're going to start looking at how to incorporate that into our training, right? So I'm happy to say that program has improved significantly, and we're seeing better results, and people are clicking on things again. So I guess that part worked as well. The second story I have was in my previous role as the head of digital adoption, where we had to deploy this application for learning. And this was very nice because we started off with an application, right? In the sense that, okay, the tech is there. How do we make sure that people actually use it? Because the tech was sexy. It was this mobile app. It had a lot of really cool gamification components. It had a sexy little robot that helped people to learn. But we had to deploy it out to the 50,000 employees across Petronas, right? So for this, we had the good guidance of a campaign team who did the research and actually spoke to different people, both from a leadership standpoint and the staff that was going to be using the application, and tried to understand what is it that makes people stay, right? How do you continue to use an application? So the three main things that we started to do was, first of all, make sure that we got our leaders involved. In Petronas, top-down messaging is very important. And that in our organization is probably not unique per se, but definitely a good way for us to make sure that everybody gets involved. So we spent a lot of time with our leaders trying to get their support for pushing the program through. We also realized that people wanted things to celebrate together. So we really used that gamification component, created communities of thought, communities of information, and got people to come together and share their knowledge as well. And lastly, of course, consistency in delivery. So we made sure that we were able to actually share the information on a daily basis and provide that engagement continuously, which people really appreciated and actually scolded us sometimes when we were late with content that came out, right? The last example that I wanted to share, so we did manage to hit in 2 years 31,000 of our staff at that point in time, published more than 500 pieces of information, and somehow gathered more than almost 300,000 comments that we use as a feedback channel to get more input from our staff, right? Now, the last story I want to share is something that's very dear to my heart. I wasn't directly involved in this, but I was there to see the inception and the growth of this amazing platform, and now I serve as the Chief Information Security Officer for Settle. So Settle is Malaysia's first fueling app, and the amazing thing about this story is that when Settle became an idea, it went nowhere near tech, right? It was really about asking, what is it that our customers actually want? Because we understand that keeping customers happy is one thing, but making them stay is another, right? So we wanted to see what are the frictions that our customers are experiencing. So we spent weeks talking to people, and I say we, meaning Petronas. And we talked to parents with kids in the car, single drivers, people who spent their time on the road, really trying to understand what are the things that you experience as part and parcel of your experience as a driver. And despite the rise of EVs, fueling remains one of the key things you have to do if you own a car, right? And a lot of the frictions that we understood from our end users is that fueling itself, that whole payment process, was a bit of a pain, right? So to armed with that information, the team went and developed Settle, and in its initial iteration, it allowed people to find a Petronas gas station, select the pump that you wanted to use, and pay for everything from the comfort of your own car, right? So no queuing up. The 200 ringgit credit hold was a thing of the past, and the idea was that if you had kids in the car, or if you were a driver who was uncomfortable being outside, you could use that function to simplify the fueling process. And since then, they've continued to look at the customer feedback. We continue to engage with our dealers and try to understand the environment that they work in. And Settle has evolved to integrate things like car insurance, payments for parking, as well as being able to renew your digital road tax. And all of this incorporates digital wallet capabilities, so you can make the payment directly from the app itself. Yeah, we'll continue to do those improvements as Settle evolves in its current iterations as well. So the staff, the learner, the user, they're all human beings with opinions, emotions, and priorities. And they are ultimately what ensures that the change is embedded and whatever cultural shift you want to see happen actually sticks. So we can create the most efficient of systems and the most advanced of gadgets, but we have seen time and time again that if we do not take the time to examine the motivations and the desires of the people who are going to use them, we cannot innovate and advance, right? So similarly, any transformation will not move the needle if the transformation itself does not check for cultural mindset at the core. So, in my line of work, people are in fact the problem, but more often than not, they are also the solution. Thank you for your time.